Hi everyone, it's Alex, and these are my top 10 books I read in 2017. This list is in no particular order. I'm not ranking them from like the best to the absolute best or anything like that. And the way I define best is definitely a sense of a book that's really stayed with me for a long time. So these are maybe books that I read really early within the year, as early as January 1st. But also a lot of these recent picks are actually from like the past couple weeks. So without further ado, the first book is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. So naturally I read this year and I haven't shut up about it since, so there isn't a lot to say about this because I already have a video about this on my channel. But basically, if you're looking for a really good story, but also a really good story about storytelling itself, I would highly recommend this to pick up. Another book I've talked about on this channel is Call Me By Your Name by Aciman. I still have not seen the movie adaptation yet because it doesn't come out near where I live, but hopefully I can do that very soon. I have really high hopes for it. But basically, this is a great story if you're looking for something very summer-like. I think it's a perfect summer read, but it also delves deeply into the character of Elio. But there's also the character of Oliver, which I wish had more development in this, but it's definitely clear that I think there's so much focus only on Elio because there's this clear obsession between the both of them that it's really interesting to only take from Elio's perspective as a young boy, but also still trying to be mature within this relationship that's developing. And then I think the last book I've talked about on this channel, which is Housekeeping by Marilynne, is a great book if you're really looking for really deep human connections, and especially things about loneliness and grief and family, and what it means to really try to form these bonds after bonds are severed by people that leave us or die and things like that. I know that sounds really sad, but this is definitely a book to me. Well, it is sad, but I think this is definitely a book that's somewhat hopeful about how we can really try to really connect with one another. The fourth book I really enjoyed this year is Blue Nights by Joan Didion. This is the last Joan Didion nonfiction I haven't read yet, so it's really great to finally read all of her nonfiction work. And I will say that this is definitely probably my favorite one. So Claire from Claire Reads Books, I apologize if you're watching this because I'm about to repeat myself for what I said on Goodreads. But basically whenever I read this, it felt like I was with Joan, but she didn't really know I was there, and I feel like we were probably either in an airport where we were waiting in line, or that we were in a movie theater right before the previews were starting and then the lights dim and Joan just leaves me with something really grief-stricken or beautiful or something really profound, and I'm just expected to sit there beside her and take it. For those of you that don't know, Blue Nights isn't to be confused with The Year of Magical Thinking, where Joan Didion does talk about what it's like to lose her husband. But Blue Nights is actually about what it's like to lose her daughter and kind of how horrible these things are happening within such a short time frame from one another. To me, Joan Didion doesn't really blame like the world or really anyone. In this one, she really does, in a sense, blame herself. She really does try to think back to her life whenever she could have picked up these signs to try to somehow stop this illness that could have never really been prevented in the first place. But of course, that leaves a big discussion on what it means to be a mother, thoughts on motherhood, and what it means to be a family. And the fifth book I have here is My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Tallent. This is a book I was really looking forward to. I would say it didn't really hit all of my high expectations, but I do think it's still really good. This book follows the story about a girl named Turtle and her relationship with her father as they kind of live a very isolated life. There are also other members of this family that we get to know, like Turtle's grandfather or her father's dad, and also kind of where the mother is in the picture, which I wish she would have gotten more development, but I can understand why the focus was so much on Turtle. Gabriel Tallent does such a good job at crafting setting and kind of how his characters revolve around that setting, especially with Turtle, because in a way Turtle almost feels like not a human being, if that makes sense. She feels very much just like a formula to everyone's lives, and I think that's how Turtle feels too. And she's starting to realize, like, I'm a person, I have motivations and wants and desires, and I'll do anything it takes to get those things. This is Gabriel Tallent's first novel, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of his work in the future. And now for some quick books that I don't actually have with me, but I do think are definitely worth mentioning. So the first book I wanted to mention that I don't have is The Unseen World by Liz Moore. This is also another story about a father-daughter relationship, but specifically how David's daughter Ada kind of struggles with her father's stability with his mental health. Also how she's trying to discover kind of this mystery going on with her father and things about his past. At the same time, Ada's, I think, only about 12 years old, so this is a lot for her to handle at this time, with her father being this renowned genius of sorts or a professor at his school, and how Ada is so used to surrounding herself by older people, what it means to really try to be mature within her own age. I read The Unseen World sometime around June, and I think it's like the perfect idea of a really well-paced and executed grand story. And the next book that I don't have with me that I still really enjoy a lot is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I read this book sometime in March, but I really wish I would have read it so much sooner. Of course, if you don't know Ta-Nehisi Coates, he does write a lot about the political nature of race and how his own life is affected by race. But Between the World and Me is very much sort of, kind of, I would describe, it's not really a letter, but definitely a story meant for Ta-Nehisi Coates' son, and how he needs to grow up and realize how his race affects his life and what that means for his privileges, things he can do and things he can't do, and things like that. I read Between the World and Me for an English class called Black Lives Matter, and it was really interesting to kind of really see aspects of how this book could apply to things like Afrofuturism and postmodernism, and how being black, what does that mean ultimately for our future, especially with how race is such a very strong, current, demanding presence and issue that we need to resolve within our society right now. So if you ever read one book in this life, I don't care what it is, I would hope it's Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So moving on again to the books I actually do have, the next book is Human Acts by Hong Kong. I believe I read this sometime in May, and it still really stayed with me. And I think a part of that is that this is about a student uprising happening in South Korea, and this book definitely doesn't stray from the brutality of that nature, even though with it dealing with such young people. This book is told through a series of different narratives, and kind of how this one narrative we're introduced to in the beginning kind of affects the lives of everyone else. It's also told in different times, so we can get an understanding of what's happening since the student uprising has happened, and kind of how it doesn't stray away from having such very impacting and thoughtful and thought-provoking and very heavy themes going on. Also, if you just look at it, you can see it's very short, so I really commend Hong Kong for executing such a very deliberate and strong story in such a few amount of pages. I'm actually reading The Vegetarian, also by Hong Kong, right now. I'm not sure if I'll finish it by the end of the year, but I'm really interested to see what I think of that, since it did come out before Human Acts as well. And the next book I have is Stoner by John Williams. This is actually the very first book I read in 2017. I always try to start out the year by reading a classic, so I picked this one up. And this is a great book about human nature and kind of just this guy's life and his time, and that's literally it. Can't really remember a lot from this story since I read it so long ago this year, but from what I remember, it is about this man, and I believe he's very much an academic. He believes that just staying in academia will save him from his life. It'll just give him purpose. He may not have to go to the war and things like that, especially within his time. And I think I really share similar sentiments, that I really do appreciate, and I do love academia, but I have to understand that it's not my entire life, and that I really should be trying to make connections for what I'm studying and really applying them to here's me as a person in my life versus here's me as a student in academia. But this character involved in this book is still very complex, especially along with his marriage and his nuance. I think with just trying to fumble around human relationships, especially when thinking about the setting of something so factual and formulaic like an academic setting versus a very complicated nature of trying to relate to other people in life. And we definitely do get those sort of thought-provoking ideas and internal monologue from our main character, William, and sort of how he struggles with leading his life and taking initiative and things like that. And the last book I have is The Lonely City by Olivia Laing. This book to me is very much like a self-help book, for me at least. It's definitely not read like a self-help book. It's actually read much more academically than I thought it was going to be. This is a book that takes you on the journey of Olivia Laing's experience while living in New York City, and how she feels this juxtaposition of, despite being crowded by so many people around her, she does feel still quite lonely. And in a response to that loneliness, Olivia Laing really articulates and studies and researches the loneliness of other people in history, like artists, like Andy Warhol and Edward Hopper. And specifically, it's these ideas of really analyzing sort of these texts, or people in this case, that really makes me appreciate the nature of what I study as a master's student in English literature, but also understanding the very human ideas of what it means to have human connections. So those are all the books I have for you for 2017, or at least the top 10 books that I have for 2017 that I really enjoyed. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you wanted to read these books, if my descriptions of them weren't all just me saying human connections over and over. But hopefully this list at the same time kind of gives you an idea of the kind of books that I do read, and if you have any recommendations, I would love to hear them down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.